The more speakers you add to your rig equals the more tone you get, right? Well, not always. Dual or multi-cab rigs can elevate your tone, but they can also throw you over the edge into muddiness and despair. In this video, I'm going to show you how to blend two cabs on your Line 6 Helix the right way, avoiding muddiness, boominess, and phase issues. At the end, we're going to have a look at a common 4x10 and 1x15 cabinet pairing. I'm Twisty, and in this video we're going to dial in one of the most powerful tone tricks that you can get in an amp modeler like the Helix. And that is to dial in or blend two cabinets. Adding multiple cabs to your rig isn't always about making it sound bigger. Often it's about leveraging the characteristics that each cabinet brings to the mix to give you a better sound. You might use one cabinet for its punch and the other one for its deep lows, and when combined together you get a perfect tone that you're looking for. With the range of cabinets that are available on the market and modeled in most of the amp modeling devices like Helix, why would you want to use more than one cabinet in your signal path to create a tone? One cab, like the use of a 4x10, can give you punch. But if you're not quite getting the lower end coming through, then you might want to add either EQ or a second cabinet block to be able to give you that low end punch. So you've got a high, mid, and then a low. To do that, you might want to add a 1x15 cabinet. So you've now got that really cool Geddy Lee type structure where you have a 4x10 sitting on top of a 1x15. And both cabinets are working together to give you your ultimate output tone. So as long as you blend them together, rather than using them as independent cabinets, then you're going to start to get a much fuller sound out of your bass guitar. If you look through history, and when I say history, I mean from about the 70s and the 80s, then you'll start to see as bass amplifiers start to become more advanced in their technology, and that's why I say from the 70s, because in the 60s we had the fairly standard cabinet amp configurations like the Ampegs and the Fenders. We start to look at pairings like the 4x10 with the 1x15. This is something you'd see in a Guns N' Roses rack or Geddy Lee from Rush, or you might see this in a Deep Purple configuration. So fairly common to get that split between the lows and the highs with those two cabinet pairings. Another one became popular was an 8x10 with a 2x12. This gave you the clarity with the 8x10, but some warmth with a 2x12. Without an amp modeler, I'm not sure I'd want to be carrying both of those big cabinets, but it sounds great. And a third pairing that's becoming more popular, especially in the small venue section, is a 2x10 with a 1x12. This is really popular because both cabinets are quite light and modular, but they both split that sound with a fast response of the 2x10s and the modern tone coming out of the 1x12s. So again, when you blend those two together, you're getting a fantastic different tone than you get out of either one independently. I often think of cabinets as an EQ block that goes after the tone stage of the amp. So rather than putting an EQ in, I'll often put a bass cab. And we can have a look at that when I go through an example using the HX Edit, and you'll see what I mean. Now, the biggest challenges you have in the real world when trying to mix cabinets is it's not just the cabinet, but it's also the mic you choose, the mic placement, and any EQ you put around that. So let's have a look at the mics. So a common rock style or all-round rock microphone to use on the bass is a dynamic mic. In the Helix, we'd look at the MD421, which will give you a punchy mid-range, which is great for that rock or when you're playing with a pick. Using a large diaphragm or a condenser mic, maybe like the AKG 112, then you can get extra low kick if you want that fat bottom. So mixing that with your 1x10, So mixing that with your 4x10 will give you that tight sound with a bit more bottom end to it. Putting a Beta 58 would be the similar, but if you're using an SM57, you're going to get a lot more brighter attack coming out of it. Distance from your mic or mic placement is another thing to take into consideration. The closer you get to the grill, around about 1 inch, if I'm measuring on using the Helix models, then, or flush to the grill, if you're hanging a mic across it, you'll get the fullest bass tone and the most direct sound. Pulling the microphone back around 3 to 6 inches, you're going to introduce some air into that tone and slightly reduce some of the extreme lows that are coming out of your cabinet. This can help you avoid some boominess. So if you're playing in a gig and it's sounding a bit boomy, then maybe adjusting the mic away from the cabinet a little bit will reduce that, and it gives that little bit more air around the sound. When you're setting your rig up to play for live music, I'd probably err on placing it closer to the grill than further away, because the room itself is going to give the ambience coming off the back of it, and you don't want to have too much bleed coming from other instruments on the stage. If you're using your modeling device or your HX, then I'd have it as close as you can, because again, you don't want to give the engineer other stuff to fight with when he's at the desk. When you've got multiple cabinets, keeping the microphone placement the same for both cabinets will also then help with phase issues. So if you've got one at 1 inch and one at 3 inch, you may start to find there's a little bit of phasing going on and noise cancelling of that sine wave. So you might hear the cabinets might not perform the way you're expecting them to. So my guidance is, regardless of what you set the first cabinet to, I would set the microphone for the second one around about the same as your starting point. So you've got 2 cabs, 2 microphones. You may use a different microphone for each cabinet. So as we said before, you might want to use a condenser mic on one, and you might want to use a ribbon mic on the other one. But listening to it back, you might find that it's hollow or weak, or there seems to be one seems to be cancelling the other one out. Well, that could be a problem with phase. There's 3 ways we can sort of look at dealing with phase. The first one is to flip the polarity. So on the microphone at the desk, the track will probably have a polarity button. Or if you're dealing within the box inside your Helix, and we'll have a look at that in a moment, you can change the polarity of one of the signal paths so that it doesn't cancel the other one out. You can also then look at the mics. If you set them up as I suggested before, where they're both say at 1 inch, but you're still getting some phases, maybe adjust one of them back by 1 inch and see if that helps to cancel that out. Especially if you're using similar microphones on both cabinets. Because then you're just providing a little bit of difference in the sounds to make that cancellation harder to do. And then the other one I would look at would be panning. So you could pan one slightly left and one slightly right. Again, you're now adjusting where that sine, where you're hearing the sine wave coming or the signal coming out of. And if you really want to, you can go to a bit more extreme and add some delay. So you may put some millisecond delay on one of the cabinets, and that also does a sort of a bit like adjusting the microphone, but in a lot more or less subtle way. So flip the polarity, which would be the first thing I'd try. Change the mic distance, panning them slightly, and then maybe add in some delay if you still can't fix the problem. I talked a bit earlier about the threat of multiple cabinets bring a lot of muddy sound or boxy sound to your tone. This is where your low and high cuts come in. Now, the value of using a Line 6 product is that there are low and high cuts available on each of the cabinets independently. If you don't have this, or you're using a different modeling system, or you're using a live rig, then you may want, as each microphones come into the desk, you may want to put a low high cut EQ on each of the tracks or each of the channels. With the Helix, you can do that in the box, and we'll go through that in a minute. Adding a low cut around 40 to 60 hertz, depending on how you want to play it, then you get rid of the bottom end. And you might want to adjust, so you might want to put 45 hertz on one and 50 hertz on the other to get get clear separation at that bottom end between the two cabinets. I like the 45 because it gets me still keeps some bottom end in, but it keeps me a bit of space between the kick drum. And the high cut, you might want to kick that in around between 4 and 5 kilohertz. Anything above that with your bass rig is probably either getting into guitar territory, so you're going to start clashing, or it's just wasted noise that you're not really wanting to drive out of it. Pick noise, some scraping on the frets, etc. In a 4x10, 1x15 configuration, if you let the 4x10 deal with the mids and the highs and tune around that, and then you let the 1x15 deal with the lower end, then again, playing around with your low and high cuts to make those two cabinets work together and overlap rather than clash will help you get your better sound. And finally, when you're looking at real cabinets, one of the biggest issues or common issues that are reported is that one cabinet will fundamentally be louder than the other cabinet. So as you add it, it's like you're not adding any value by adding that second one. Often in a 410, 115 configuration, the 410 is often perceived to be louder because it's picking up that high mids and the top end of your range, whereas the bottom end is being traditionally done more effectively by the 1x15, and you don't tend to hear the bottom notes as clearly as you do the mids to highs. So one will sound like it's louder than the other one. So when you're adding them both at the same volume won't necessarily give you the optimal sound you're looking for by adding the cabinets. So again, we'll have a look in a minute, but when you're on the Helix, but when you're doing a live rig, you want to make sure that you're adjusting the faders to blend in those two cabinets, not just going, it's bass, they're both set at 0 or whatever number. So there will be some trickiness. The advantage of using a modeler like the HX is that you can do that in the box and not worrying about what the front of house guy is doing and to stuff your mix up. So if we have a look at a configuration of a dual cabinet setup, I've got a very basic SVT normal channel config. I think this was actually set up straight out of the box. I didn't make any changes to it. And I've added a dual cab. Now I'm going to try and replicate a common 2 cab setup. Now these could be 2 4x10s, 2 115s, but in this case I'm going to try and simulate that 4x10 plus a 1x15 cabinet configuration. So if I look at the 4x10, I'm trying to use that to capture that punchy mids broad sound. I've chosen a 57 dynamic mic. I'm putting it on the cap edge. So this is going to give me a bright sound. So it should be a punchy, bright sound. Let's have a listen to that. I've got it right on the grill at 1 inch, and I'm rolling off 45 hertz, and I'm rolling off anything above 5 kilohertz. So that means I'm staying right within the sweet spot for the bass. I've got the level set at 0 dB at the moment. So at the moment, I've only got this one with any volume. I've panned it to the center and I haven't included any delay. So remember, if we're starting to get phasing issues, I can start adding a little bit of delay, or I can start looking at panning them, the 2 cabs. Now, if I move over to the 1x15, so all I'm doing is I'm zeroing the volume for that and turning the volume on for the 1x15. For 1x15, I want to get a little bit more broader tone out of it. So I'm using a 421 dynamic mic. So I've changed the mic up and the cab up. I'm leaving them both at cap edge, and I've got this again on the grill at 1 inch. Same as the 1x15, the 4x10, I'm rolling off anything under 45 hertz, and I'm rolling off anything above 5 kilohertz. So by itself, this will sound like this. A little bit more on the bottom end, so sort of instead of mids to highs, I'm getting mids to lows. So now what I want to do is blend those two together to take advantage of the mids to highs and the mids to lows. There'll be a crossover in the middle, and I want to try and get more fuller sound out of using both cabinets. Over on the 4x10, I've got it, because I want to give a bit more bottom end to the 1x15, I'm going to roll off anything below 60 Hertz. I had it at 45 Hertz, now I'm saying at 60 Hertz. And I brought the volume of this one up to 0. So this is going to be I'm basing this as my main cabinet tone. And then over on the 1x15, I have put the low cut at 45 Hertz. So I've left it the same. So it's getting out of the way of the kick drum a bit, but it's taking a little bit more bottom end than the 4x10, which is, I'm rolling off anything, so between 45 and 60, this cabinet's going to pick that up, and then everything above that, they'll both kick in. So I've created a loop to play along, to listen to as I'm dialing this in. And what I'm going to do is I'm now going to dial in the 1x15, listening to where it starts to fill out what the 1x10 was doing. So I'm starting it at around about 0. So as I'm starting coming in, I can start to hear it coming in. You can hear that bottom end starting to kick in a bit more. That's with them a parody. And to me, just pushing that 1x15 up just a little bit higher than the 4x10. Now I could drop the 4x10 back a little bit, but I'll push the 1x15 up. So to me, I'm now getting that tight punch of the 4x10, but you can hear the bottom end, it's got a little bit more beef to it that's been added to by the 1x15. Now, as I said, if I was starting to get some phasing in there, I could start playing around with the panning or adding some delay to that. But to me, in my ears, I'm not getting any phase, I'm not getting any cut out. One's not overwriting the other one. And playing around with that volume and the low cut is giving me that nice blend to put together. So as you can see, one of the major advantages I find using a modeling device like the Helix or the HX Stomp, or Quad Cortex, any of those that allow you to have dual cabinets, is that ability to blend in dual cabs inside the box, get the exact tone that I want, and then push that to the front of house or to the in-ear mix or the recording desk or wherever you're going to. Because I'm mixing inside the box, I then don't have to worry too much about the boominess or the phasing, because I can deal with that in the signal path. I can adjust the microphones to pick up exactly the tone I want out of each of the cabinets independently. So if you're looking for that pro level sound, playing around with multiple cab types and blending them together with various microphones is how you're going to get to that. But remember, it's not just about adding the cabs and randomly playing. Understanding the effect that a microphone has over a cabinet and the characteristics of the cabinet type is going to help you to get there a lot faster than just going, I need a 4x10 and a 1x15, blah, right? Getting to that pro sound means understanding how it all works together. And that's fundamental to becoming a better tone master. I often use the dual cabinet with the same cabinets, but with different mics. If I like that tone that's coming out of a 4x10 or an 8, traditionally I'm using an 8x10, and I may want a second one, but I'll use different mics at different distances to get that blend of different tone coming out at the final end. But again, you might want to find that using two different cabinets, the 410 and the 115 is a very common 80s rock traditional design, but that 2x10 with the 1x12 is pretty cool, especially if you want to use this outside of the modeling world, because I can tell you now, they're a lot easier to carry than an 8x10 and a 2x12. And if you haven't seen already, check this video out on how the impedance or the values of the cabs will affect your sound. Catch you next time.